when you see the introduction, it helps us understand, kind of divide these chapters up. Of course, we're beginning with chapter 2, and we go through chapter 6 and verse 30 in this lesson. As we've been reading the 2 Kings 22 and 2 Chronicles 34, I hope you kind of go over that in your minds and read it, maybe more than once, to see Josiah and Jehoiakim and what was happening during their reigns. And there was reform taking place in Josiah's day. Here he comes to be a king at 8 years old. He had a mentor, had a priest. And yet at 16 and at age 20, and as he matures, he's seeing, and his heart is saddened because he sees the scroll that's been found and people are not following it. So there was reform. But what do you have to change if you're going to have permanent reform? And that's true today. If we're going to have reform, what has to be changed? Our hearts. And our what we focus upon, what we value, because we can get back into the old ways. And that's the lesson we learn from Josiah's reign and Jeremiah's work. He doesn't get the people to change. But that didn't change the fact, as we saw last week, if you don't follow, I've chosen you before you were born to be my prophet. And if you are not going to do what you're supposed to do, then you will be held responsible. And we see through Ezekiel and Jeremiah, they're watchmen of God. They're setting forth a warning, and they have a job to do, even though the results may not be the way they would like it. Why did Isaiah take on the, here am I, send me? When you read that in Isaiah 6, he saw the glory of God, his holiness, and that humbles him. Here am I, send me. So I'm sending you to harden their hearts. To harden their hearts. And that's how God was going to use Isaiah. So be it. He said, well, God, use me in your service. It may be not what you thought it would be, so glorious, but it's needful. People are having the opportunity to be warned, to be changed, and the change is not occurring as it has been. But God, we see Jeremiah presenting a case for God that they should change. And therefore, we see in chapter 3, there's the plea to repent, and we see what is involved in repentance, and then we see the inescapable judgment that's going to be coming by the enemy from the north. And who is coming from the north upon Jerusalem and Judea? Babylon. That's the one in history. So that opens up the particulars that we're going to observe today in this lesson. So we ask this first question. Describe the covenant relationship. When you have a covenant relationship, we usually have, well, here's what I think it ought to be like, and then you agree with me, or we make compromises. A covenant relationship with God is kind of a one-way street. You either take it or leave it, but you're not going to sit there and say, here are the terms, and we'll have a covenant. We'll make a deal. That doesn't work with God. He lays down, hisses the demands, and then we come into that relationship by honoring the requirements of that covenant, what that covenant is about. So we want to describe the covenant that existed in Israel's youth with her God. What is the term when you take these first three verses? What could you say? That sounds like the covenant of what? Marriage. Did somebody say marriage? Excuse me? Okay. Espousal, which is much as you're just as good as married in the Old Testament and the New, because you had determined to do that. And it shows you this espousal was one that involved them going and following after him in the wilderness. And they had went out to him. But you're right. It's this idea of engagement, which is a promise of marriage that would take place. And he speaks about the youth. It's like a young wife, a young person, and showing notice he says, remember for thee the kindness of thy youth. That's not God. You might have another term instead of kindness. What might you have? Devotion. Some have mercy. Well, I like kindness better than that. A gentleness. And it's almost like you're kind to God because God couldn't get a wife. She was sure kind to marry me or be engaged to me. That was the case. And of course, he's looking, as you'll see in this chapter, when we talk about marriage, he said, I could put you away. Well, you don't put somebody away unless there's that commitment of marriage. And there was a sense of how strong that was, just like with Joseph and Mary. So, but he speaks about, here is this courtship that leads to the devotion and the idea of a promise to obey this covenant. He says, I remember for thee the kindness of thy youth, the love of thine espousals, my commitment in marriage, how thou wentest after me in the wilderness. He said, I'm not forcing you. You came out with me in the wilderness. He remembers those days in a land which was not sown. Of course, they were going to have the promised land to look forward to. Israel was holiness unto Jehovah. There's this marriage relationship, and there's this the idea of the spouses, and the idea of she's coming here and say, you are indeed was the holiness unto Jehovah. You're separated unto me. There's that marriage commitment to one another. The first fruits of his increase. And I tell you what, he's looking over that, because what is he willing to do? All that devour him, devour God's people, which is like in a marriage covenant, shall be held guilty. Evil shall come upon them, saith who? Jehovah, her husband. And that's the covenant relationship that we're seeing here. It is that close. And he's going to come across this because I didn't give you a bill of divorcement. Well, you weren't even married yet. You're just engaged. No, the commitment was there to be married. And I didn't give that to you, but he gave the bill of divorcement to Israel. Because you can't take them back, can you? Under the old law. And he wasn't going to take them back. He didn't bring them back from captivity. They're involved in being in the land already. But who do they bring back from captivity? Judah. So God is very consistent, even at this beginning, of trying to keep this reform going with Josiah. But it is a close relationship, just like a covenant of marriage. That's the concept that we get. All right? Any questions or comments you want to add to that? All right, question number 2. What 2 evils had God's people committed? And these are kind of things that we have to read a lot to get there. But what have they done? The idolatry. That's exactly right. I'm trying to save a lot of time, but let's just get the feel. Hear the word of Jehovah, O house of Jacob, all the families of the house of Israel. So you've got Jacob and then the house of Israel. Thus said Jehovah, what unrighteousness have your fathers found in me, that they are gone far from me and have walked after vanity? Why is idolatry vanity? It's false God. It's fruitless in the sense of having any relationship with the true God, and we become vain when we worship vanity. Where is Jehovah that brought us out of the land of Egypt, that led us through the wilderness, through a land of deserts and pits, through a land of drought and of the shadow of death, through a land that none passed through, and where no man dwell? I brought you to a plentiful land. You came out to me in the wilderness, and we were good. But all of a sudden, what have they done? They've forsaken him. Verse 8, the priest said not, where is Jehovah? And they that handle the law knew me not. The rulers transgressed against me. The prophets prophesied by Baal and walked after things they do not profit. That's what's vanity. You're walking after things that don't profit you. You do things, and there's going to be judgment upon it. But it's a vanity, it doesn't bring forth good. Wherefore I will yet contend with you, said Jehovah, and with your children's children will I contend, consequences of your actions. For pass over to the isles of Kittim and see, and send unto Kedar, and consider diligently, and see if there have been such a thing. So when he says Kedar, there's your Gentile nations. There's the people coming from afar off. Mediterranean Sea and so forth. Hath a nation changed its gods, which yet are no gods? Good point. Do you know of any nation, any Gentile nation, that in midstream When God had brought you in the wilderness and took care of you, brought you out of Egypt, miraculous signs, took care of them for their food, took care of all those things, and they went after him in the wilderness. They knew how good he was. And then all of a sudden, where's Jehovah? He hasn't deserted them. They have deserted him. And it says, but my people have changed their glory for that which doth not profit, when there's no reason to do so from God's standpoint. Be astonished, O you heavens, at this, and be horribly afraid. Be very desolate, says Jehovah. For my people have committed two evils. Now here's our answer, right? Two evils. But look what led up to that. Is the fact God feels resentment because he hasn't changed. And he is the same God that they went out and honored and profited from. For my people have committed two evils. They have forsaken me. And who is he? The source, the fountain of living what? Of living waters. How he demonstrated when they got thirsty, what did he do? He had rock come out of, had water come out of flint rock. And what you've done, you've hewed them out cisterns. Well, we're going to hold some water now. We can get water. God, you give us water, but now we're going to get water. You've done the cisterns. They're broken cisterns, and they do not hold what? No water. Here's the fountain of living water, and you've built a little pond out here, retention pond, and it didn't hold it very long. It's gone. Now, where are you now? And that's what they've done. And why should this be so astonishing? We just read it. It's not heard of to have a God like that. And you turn your back on. You look throughout, why did the Greeks, and we see in the New Testament, they had gods for everything, didn't they? And why? Because maybe this is mad at the other one or something. Not everything was coming about, but there's a God of the sea, and there's a God of reproduction and all of that, and we worship that particular God and this particular God. But the one true God is the source of all things. He gives life to all, and he's giving them living waters, and he's proven that over and over again. And they just in midstream changed. And they've done the two evils. Forsook me, and look what you put in my place. Sometimes we think about the evils that are we just forsook God. But I'm my own man? No. You're serving yourself, but you're a slave to something. We worship something, don't we? If we're not worshiping God, we're worshiping ourselves, and we're doing what we want to do, and we'll call the shots. And we'll fit what our lives, what our morality we have, our moral standards. We'll follow that, but we're not going to follow God. And when people in Romans the 2nd chapter, that people are factious, but they obey their own lusts. You're obedient. You're a slave to those whom you're going to submit in obedience to, and that's just a fact. Some argue today, and there's some truth that we were created to be worshipful people. We're going to worship something. If it's not the one true God, we're going to worship man. I will determine my sex. Thank you, God. I don't like what you did. What's that all about? Is it based upon, are people realize that's a scientific fact? You're seeing the joke parade before your eyes. Media, so all the corporations. What's Bud Light for now? We don't drink beer, but what is it for? It's for a trans guy being a woman now. Bud Light. Who ever thought that would be the case? That you sell beer, this is how we're going to sell it now. And honor. That is our culture that has said, we're not going to worship any God. We're going to change, but we're going to change everything that God stands for. And what have they done? We don't pray to him in our schools. We don't do this. We don't do it. We don't serve him. And we're going to even change science. because we have the power to just say, I'm this, I'm that, and that's it. That's true. And that's the chaos we have. Because what's going to continue to happen? Facts of science. And who's behind that knowledge? God. And I think sometimes he did that. I think about, I always thought, well, he made male and female. Okay, got it. Is that an important passage now? Male and female? That they are different? And yet that they come together and bring forth life and children and replenishing the earth and all that sort of thing, how God planned that was. But realize that becomes an important thing now. And it once was, we're going to deal with same-sex marriage. Boy, that was a few years ago, and that was the big battle. Now what are we doing? I'm a he, and I'm going to be a wife to her. And he's a he. It's all chaos. But that's because we want it, and when we change reality of God and his laws, we got chaos, we got violence. You look at the coming of the flood. What happened? And there's another thing that's pressed upon our mind. We've seen that. When people are going to not follow the law of God or the laws of the land, and they don't have any higher power but their own power, what can men do to others? They can abuse them, can't they? And we see that without any impunity. Or not much. And that's kind of society right now, but that won't hold. I mean, there's going to be a disruption, and that's kind of the plan. Let's make it all chaos, and we'll have the government come in and fix it the way we want it. But we will eliminate God. We'll eliminate the founding fathers, because what did they do? They founded upon principles of God. That's the society we live in. And we're Christians, and we're not political, but we can observe things, and we can hold to the truth of God's word. And it's been true even in Jeremiah's day, that when you are going to forsake me, you will have something to replace me, and it's so inferior. How could you do that when I blessed you so much? And that's the hit at heart. David, you had your hand up. That's true. And then you see, why aren't women standing up in sports? Why aren't women's movement doing that? Some of them are quiet. Why? Because we're going to all be together, and women, you're just going to have to suffer. You're not going to be having sports any longer. Well, there was enough women, young women said, no, we're going to have sports. So the battle goes. And who's going to win? I'm going to be on the side of God, who created us, male, female, and we don't replace God. And if we do, it is something so inferior, and there'll be repercussions from that. Because why should they be horribly afraid? Why should they be horribly afraid? Because judgment's coming. There's going to be a consequence for this. And that's going to be, they're going to be left in verse 12 very desolate. They're going to be very desolate is what's going to happen. And it's going to occur. Be afraid, ye very desolate, said Jehovah. When there's nothing around and the population's been destroyed, the city's been destroyed, it's only good for wild animals. That's not a way Jerusalem was to be. Any comments on that? All right. Question number 3. What 2 alliances would not help Israel to escape punishment? So when you're going to forsake God, we're wiser than God, and what we're going to do, we're going to have this plan. We're going to have alliances that will keep us safe from Babylon. And who are they? Egypt is one. Syria is another one. And that's exactly right. Verse 18. And now why hast thou to do in the way of Egypt? To drink the waters of the Shahar? Or what hast thou to do in the way of Assyria? To drink the waters of the river, which would be the river Euphrates. Why is he talking about water? Because I'm the fountain of living waters. I am the source. And here are these principal rivers and seas and water sources for Egypt and Assyria. That's where we'll turn to. We'll get our sustenance from them. They can't hold water. They're not going to be able to withstand Babylon. They're not going to withstand me, because Babylon is going to be my instrument to take care of that problem. All right. Question number 4. Describe Israel playing the role of the harlot from the following perspectives. Going after Balaam. What is harlotry expressed at? What are we talking about going after Balaam? Now, it's not the false prophet. This is Baal. Baal. What does that ring a bell? What is that? An idol. It's a god. And they're going after Balaam. They're going after the idolatry that have taken place, and they should realize that should not be. What about as God is her husband? Well, I didn't put that there, so we'll get back to that. But let's talk about as God is her husband. What does verse 25 say? Withhold thy foot from being unshod, and thy throat from thirst. But thou said, it is vain. No, for I have loved strangers, and after them will I go. Who has they gone after? And in the wilderness, they went after whom? God. That's changed. We will go after strangers. I'm sharing my love that's reserved for God. And there's to be my husband. That's the type of covenant we're talking about. And you've gone after the lovers. And so that was something that was wrong for them to do. What is the sense of shame when they're playing the role of a harlot? There should be shame with that. Look at verse 26. As the thief is what? Ashamed. When he is found. Why did he have shame? He got caught. That's not godly sorrow, is it? But it's the real things of the world. When he is found, so is the house of Israel ashamed. They, their kings, their princes, their priests, and their prophets, because they've been found out. They've been caught. And I'm indicting them through my prophet Jeremiah. And that's what they are doing. He says, they say to a stock, thou art my father. And to a stone, thou hast brought me forth. For they turned their back unto me, and not their face, but the time of their trouble, they will say, arise and save us. They will call on me to save them, and I'm not going to. They need to reform now, because destruction is coming upon them. So there's indeed was the shame there. And then Israel's lovers, I go back to verse 25, and they've gone after them. I have loved strangers, and after them will I go. So I'm leaving God. That was part of playing the harlot. That indeed Jeremiah is accused of, because it's under context of marriage and that commitment and that covenant. That's what it once was. But he begins to unfold it for us what has happened there. Neat? All right. Number 5. What day would come when the people would not be asking about the Ark of the Covenant? Ark of the Covenant was always, but a lot of times it was coming out, and that would be the presence of God as we're ready to do battle, as we're ready to go forth and do a battle with the enemy. And there'll be a day when that indeed will not be taking place. They will indeed be too late. They're not going to rely upon that, because it's not going to be there to help them. So we see that. Let's go to Jeremiah 3 and verse. You've forgotten my days in chapter 2. They say, if a man put away his wife, and she go from him and become another man's, will he return unto her again? This is my point. The marriage commitment. And here you've taken a wife. So it wasn't just dating. It wasn't just I'm engaged and we're not married. It was the commitment that was connected with the espousal that you are my husband. And he says, what law is he talking about here? Not between two people that were not married yet, but they were indeed had become married. It led to that, but it includes this. The marriage covenant is being set forth. And what law and where do we find it so we could understand what Jeremiah is saying here? All right, go to Deuteronomy, the 24th chapter, the law of Moses, the covenant, the Old Testament covenant law. And it's interesting that this was a law, it was kind of a contingency type of wording. When a man had taken a wife and married her, then it shall be if she find no favor in his eyes because he hath found some unseemly thing in her, that he shall write her a bill of divorcement and give it in her hand and send her out of his house. And when she's departed out of the house, she may go and be another man's wife. That's inserted there, but that's the understanding. If the latter husband hate her and write her a bill of divorcement and give it in her hand and send her out of the house, or if the latter husband die who took her to be his wife, her former husband who sent her out of the way may not take her again. This is an abomination. That's law. Well, if a man put away his wife and she go from him and become another man's, will he return unto her again? No. The reason for Deuteronomy 24 is to slow down divorce. You left a woman in a precarious position, especially during that day, and so you better be sure, because you can never have her back again. I don't care if the next husband gives her a bill of divorcement and she can be another man's wife. I don't care if the man dies. You can never have her back again. That's an abomination before God. What's that saying? You know, burning the toast wasn't that important. I'm sorry. I'm not going to give you the bill of divorcement. It was a slow down, hard-heartedness that I'll just put away my wife because I find something unseemly in her. And that word denotes something connected with nakedness. I know it's not fornication or adultery because you killed them. You put them to death. You didn't give them a bill of divorcement and then get another man's wife. You put them to death. And if you even were jealous about it, God would make them drink the water. You'll find out if she's been faithful or not. That's there. So this is unseemly thing. Maybe she was parading around in attire that was showed off her nakedness and that sort of thing, or maybe she was provocative sexually to other people and that sort of thing. Unseemly. Maybe she did not produce enough children. Nakedness connected with bringing forth birth. I'll put away for that. What did King Henry VIII do? thought it was her fault. It's his fault. He couldn't have a male. But the sense of this, it was just slow it down. And so how come we're not under that law today? And how do I know for a fact? Because I got brethren who says there's only one covenant of marriage in this, all the Old and New Testament. There's only one covenant. But I know what's different about the new covenant regarding marriage and this one. I could give David. Fornication, and I could put her away, but I'm talking about having her back again. That's the law I'm talking about. I can give her a bill of divorce, but you're right. The only reason I could do that is fornication. What I'm saying is that they'll go to Deuteronomy 24 and say, this is the law that we have in place today. If that's the case, what contradicts that in the new covenant? Now, Matthew 19:9. 1 Corinthians, that's right. Because of 1 Corinthians 7, here's a lady that has left her husband. And well, she just left him, went out for a weekend. No, because she is to remain what? unmarried. She's to remain unmarried or be reconciled. He didn't say remain unmarried and be reconciled. Remain unmarried, but if you can be reconciled to him, that's the other choice. Or you couldn't do that under Deuteronomy 24. You cannot be reconciled back to the husband, and especially the one that you put away. You couldn't have them back again. And I don't know why our brethren can't see that, but what they do, they have an agenda to make just one law of marriage, and you can put away, it doesn't have to be for fornication. You can put people away. And that's not necessarily a sin. Well, it is a sin because it contradicts God's law. There's only one reason we could scripturally put away someone. And that's the beauty and the God's plan has always been one man, one woman for life, and without divorce. But he gave one reason for divorce in the New Testament. He had a bunch of them in the Old. One in the New, because he was perfecting, this is what I want now. Now Jesus has commanded whosoever, back to Matthew 19:9 or Matthew 5, and in 1 Corinthians 7 is just reinforcing that. This is the way it should be. And therefore it is a distinct, different covenant than what we read about in Deuteronomy 24. But there's always a reason for that. And you just look for what are they trying to justify in the marriage today to make it all one. Because they can read that just like you did. And they can reason right. But our agendas get ahead, and it happens in any doctrinal matter. That's the way we are. Yes, sir.
Kind of correlating, like you were saying, with the Old Testament being a thing made with hands compared to the New Testament, is that covenant that's in heaven being the thing made by God.
Yeah.
Is really reflected, I think, in this law also, because you see, even when we look at what Jesus says, he says that divorce from the beginning it was not so. It was not something that God wanted. And we even look in the Old Covenant, and we know that God hates divorce. We look at Malachi chapter 2. It's been something that was there, but because of the hardness of their hearts.
That's right.
God took time until the more perfect law was come. It's something he's always hated.
That's right. Coming back to chapter 3, and we drop down to verse 6, just to show you how distinctively he's applying this law. Thank you. He said, moreover, Jehovah said unto me, verse 6, in the days of Josiah, there's our reformed king, hast thou seen that which backsliding Israel hath done? She's gone up. That's Israel. That's northern kingdom. And I said after she had done all these things, she will return unto me, but she returned not. And her treacherous sister Judah saw it. And I saw when for this very cause the backsliding of Israel had committed adultery, I had put her away and given her a bill of divorcement. Yet treacherous Judah, her sister, feared not. But she also went and played the harlot. And it came to pass through the lightness of her whoredom that the land was polluted, and she committed adultery with stones and with stocks. There's your idolatry. And yet for all this her treacherous sister Judah hath not returned unto me with her whole heart, but feignedly saith Jehovah. She's not really reformed, but feignedly she's come back. And Jehovah said unto me, backsliding Israel has showed herself more righteous than treacherous Judah. Go and proclaim these words toward the north, and say, return thou backsliding Israel, said Jehovah. I will not look in anger upon you, for I am merciful, said Jehovah. And I will not keep anger forever. Only acknowledge thy iniquity, and thou hast transgressed against Jehovah thy God, and hast scattered thy ways to the strangers unto every green tree, and have not obeyed my voice, said Jehovah. Return, O backsliding children, said Jehovah, for I am a husband unto you, and I will take you one of a city and two of a family, and will bring you to Zion. And I will give you shepherds according to my heart, who shall feed you with knowledge and understanding. And it shall come to pass, when you are multiplied and increased in the land of those days, said Jehovah, they shall say no more, the ark of the covenant of Jehovah, neither shall it come to mind, neither shall they remember it. Why? Because I am now brought you back. I am the one in power. And I think he's talking about when, as we fulfill that in Jesus Christ, we coming at that time. At that time shall they call Jerusalem the throne of Jehovah, and all the nations shall be gathered unto it, Gentile nations. And they'll do it in the name of Jehovah, to Jerusalem, and neither shall they walk any more in the stubbornness of their evil heart. In those days the house of Judah shall walk with the house of Israel, united. God's people, the Jews, will be united, but it'll be with the nations. And that's speaking about the kingdom that Christ will establish. And he said, and come together out of the land of the north to the land that I've given her for inheritance unto their fathers. They're going to go into captivity because they have vainly reformed. And he's already told Josiah, when you read the history, that's what just, I don't think about it enough. Josiah was told that it's too late for reform, in essence, because they're not going to reform. Yeah, they are. And Josiah had type of reform, but Jeremiah said, you haven't come to me with your whole heart. And you saw what your sister did. I did put her away. And he didn't have her back. But he brought Judah. He brought that remnant from Judah. And he's looking far into the future. He didn't know that, but he's prophesying about nations and Gentiles and Israel and Judah. Israel was annihilated, but they come together, not as two kingdoms, but under the kingdom and the ensign banner of Jesus Christ. And but I said, how I will put thee among the children and give thee a pleasant land, a goodly heritage, the host of the nations, I said. You shall call me my father, and shall not turn away from following me. Surely as a wife treacherously departed from her husband, so have ye dealt treacherously with me, O house of Israel, said Jehovah. A voice is heard from the bare heights, and the weeping and the supplications of the children of Israel, because they have perverted their way, and they have forgotten Jehovah their God. Return, you backsliding children, I will heal your backsliding. So there's appeal to them to come, but especially God's people. So they will not ask for the Ark of the Covenant because they're going to have the blessings under the presence of Christ and presence of God in his spiritual kingdom. That will come about. All right, I know our time is, how does God describe true repentance? Drop down with me to chapter 4. And verse 3 says, for thus said Jehovah to the man of Judah and to Jerusalem, break up your fallow ground and sow not among thorns. Circumcise yourselves to Jehovah and take away the foreskins of your what? Your heart. Ye men of Judah, inhabitants of Jerusalem, lest my wrath go forth like fire and burn so that none can quench it because of the evil of your doings. They're doing evil, but here's, we talked about at the beginning, what has to change for proper reform? The circumcision of the heart, to separate it from the foreskin, as circumcision is. But that heart, separated from the evil that's in our hearts. And under Manasseh and even as Josiah is trying to have reform, they had done evil. They had treated one another wrongfully. And I think that's a good place to stop. We'll begin, Lord willing, question number 7 about the hot wind. And we'll talk about that. But any comments or things you'd like to add before we close? Okay, thank you for being here and participating.